had been sort of ignored. Some would say it's we really do want in this administration now to move toward a final settlement, and others say, well, no, all you really need is motion. And I've seen quotes attributed to people who are still working in the National Security Council in statements to Israeli officials exactly to that effect. Never mind, this is not movement, this is just motion. Which, if any of those, do you think this is, or is it something else? And is it just motion, or is it intended to get something done?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't think it's entirely just motion, though certainly motion is part of the optics. I mean, if you need to, the Palestinian situation is getting very grim at the moment. So Rice feels that you're empowering a whole generation of youth with embitterment and anger. And if you don't show the possibility of promise or potential, you're just going to lose a whole generation of Palestinians. That is something she said publicly a number of times. The actual motivation for this project, I believe, began with Iran. Rice really became interested in becoming serious about this after the war with Lebanon, that is, the Israeli war in Lebanon against Hezbollah. And she wanted to find a way to counteract the growth of Iranian influence in the region, which, of course, is partly the consequence of the administration's invasion of Iraq, knocking over Iran's, worst enemy, suddenly gave greater Iranian influence in the region. So the Iranians are empowered, they're emboldened. And you see that particularly in the Hezbollah war. So what do you do with the Iranians? Well, you've got to get together the Arab world to fight the Iranians. What's the best way to get the Arab world together? Well, show that you're being serious about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I mean, Arab diplomats have been saying to me for years about how angry they were at how the United States didn't seem to treat this issue with either fairly or with any interest. It was just a bunch of rhetoric, occasional appointments of monitors or envoys, but no follow-through. So, and in fact, one of Rice's top aides, a man known as Philip Zelikow, who Rice once described to me as her soulmate, gave a speech about a month or so after the end of the Hezbollah war, where he said, let's face it, the only way we ever are going to get Arab support to help us on things like Iran and Iraq is if we complete the bargain by showing that we're serious about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. At the time he said that, the State Department denied that that was really what was going on, but I think it's striking that he said it and that he is so close to Rice. And I think it reflects what she was thinking. Now, whether it's really that serious is a very good question. It says something about the state of foreign policy for the United States that the administration thinks that one of its prime prospects for a legacy achievement is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which of course has been intractable for 60 years. But we'll see. At the moment, they've had this conference in Annapolis. You did see the president there last week. I've not seen much evidence that they're really serious about doing something this year. Or even if the people on the ground, Mahmoud Abbas or Ehud Olmert, who are both not very well liked in their own countries, are capable of making much progress. But stranger things have happened in the Middle East. So we'll reserve judgment for the next year.
Okay, I've got one.
Okay.
You mentioned this a little earlier when you were speaking about the policy shift over the last several months in the Bush administration's foreign policy towards North Korea, Iran, Iraq. And I just wanted to ask you whether this shift in policy was something that Condoleezza Rice wanted to pursue all along. Was this something the president wanted to do? Or was this just sort of the result of a maturation process over the last 6-7 years out of being the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State?
I think it's the last. The result of, they've tried a variety of things, a lot of which haven't worked. So, you know, it didn't work isolating North Korea. You know, they ended up with 10 or 9 nuclear weapons, and you know, and you had the Asian allies terribly upset and distressed. So what are you going to do? That first approach didn't work, so now you're going to try this, which is, you know, kind of taking what Clinton did, trying to freeze that reactor again, and then trying to go beyond that. The problem, of course, is that the North Koreans now have all this plutonium, which they'll probably never give up. I mean, I don't think anyone really expects that, despite all of Chris Hill's heroics, that he'll actually get all that plutonium back. And you know, the other thing is, I mean, you shouldn't underestimate the impact of the Democratic victory in 2006, because you suddenly had an alternative voice being made on a lot of these policy issues. And in fact, the North Korea policy changed just a few weeks after the Democrats took power and after Donald Rumsfeld was kicked out as defense secretary. Those were two very important parts of that, because Rumsfeld was a break, and he was always an ally and a kind of a with Cheney, and the fact that Democrats won just meant that they would have to go up to Capitol Hill and defend those policies, and there were policies that weren't working, so they shifted a little bit. Yes.
Thank you. I was just curious to know what sort of future do you see for Condoleezza Rice's career, like her political career, or where she could, you know, which role could she play in the U.S. politics in the future?
Well, officially she says she's going back to Stanford University, where she was a professor and was a provost. You know, I think she may write a book, her own book. Though she says it's a book that no one will want to read. She wants to write a serious foreign policy tome. So I somehow suspect that a publisher with millions of dollars will convince her that a more readable book might be more lucrative. She'll probably make some money, get on corporate boards, that sort of thing, which she did before she became part of this administration. There are some of her aides that suggest that she would be interested in running for governor of California after Schwarzenegger goes, and that's, you know, she's always said that she's much more of an executive branch type person rather than a legislative person. She turned down offers to run for the Senate, Colorado, to run for Congress from California, and she doesn't have very good relations with Congress. So I don't see her in Congress, but I do see her. I could see her where she's running something like a state. And then lastly, she always talks about, you know, her love of athletics, and she's quite a fanatical football fan. I mean, she knows more about football than most football coaches. And some people have suggested to me that she might want to do what George W. Bush did, and that is get a bunch of rich people to help buy you a sports team and then manage that sports team, which would be completely different, and she might actually welcome not having to worry about the problems of the world and only have to worry about the problems of a few football players. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that with the upcoming presidential elections that the role of the National Security Advisor as far as foreign policy decision-making will continue to grow as it has been over the current Bush administrations?
Yeah, no, the National Security Advisor is actually required by law. It's a statutory position that was created by a law that passed when Harry Truman was president, 1947. Now, each president has that position done in a different way. Now, one of the things that President Bush did that I think a lot of people would say is a mistake is he cut back the size of the National Security Council staff and tried to take away its role in the kind of policy formulation function, which I don't think necessarily worked that well. I mean, and Steve Hadley, the current National Security Advisor, is not a particularly powerful figure compared to Secretary of State Rice at the moment.